All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to talk to you today in the new week. And Monday is Arlen Day. So glad to talk to Arlen as well. Arlen, good morning. Well, it's morning where you are. It's afternoon where I am. Who knows where our viewers are, what time it might be. How you doing today?
I'm doing just fine. It was an exciting weekend football-wise. I didn't see all the games, but I saw a good part of a lot of them. They were close. They have some good teams left, and next weekend's going to be exciting, and the Super Bowl will be even more exciting, I think.
No question. I have to say, while watching those games, one thing that struck me is how remarkable these athletes are. Just watching the quarterback play, especially the way they can throw the ball 60 yards in the air, just like a darts, laser beams. And then also watching the Buffalo quarterback Josh Allen and Baltimore's Lamar Jackson. These guys are not only tremendous throwers, but they're incredible runners too. They're very hard to tackle. They're fast. They're shifty. The athleticism is off the charts in the NFL. There's no question about it.
And they're getting hit, all the time by 300-pound linebackers and defensive ends and being knocked all over the place. And they're not huge themselves as quarterbacks, but most of them survive.
Well, Josh Allen's pretty big. I think he's over 240 pounds and 6'5". So he's pretty big, but you're right. They're not as big. I have to say, I find it very exciting to watch. I'm amazed at their abilities, their skill set. But I still have this queasy feeling watching because of the hits, because you do see so many people injured. It really, it's a guilty pleasure, shall I say, for me at least.
And of course, it doesn't help when penalties play such a big part in a lot of these games. It's very close, some of these calls. So that disturbs me some too. But it's just part of the game.
Well, it's true what you say about the penalties, but the flip side of that is, you don't want players cheating. You don't want them hitting before the ball gets there. You don't want them taking cheap shots at other players because that ruins the game too. So you got to enforce the rules, but you're right. There are points when the rules are enforced and you're like, man, do they really have to call that? So like everything, it's close. We got a lot to talk about, Arlen, and I'm sure this will get to be one of those shows where we have some disagreements, but interesting topics as well. Donald Trump kind of would you say he's wrapped it up? I mean, I've got that, the promo slide there, Trump. And do you think that's fair? Trump v. Hillary. Now, I flagged this over the weekend. Is Nikki Haley the new Hillary? We'll get into where there might be similarities, but I just want to ask you if you, where is that fair to either of those two women to compare them to each other? Is there something sexist? I got accused of sexism for even bringing this up. Trump, by the way, is the one who put that mishmash, the sort of mishmash of Nikki Haley and Hillary Clinton together in that image you see.
Well, I think a lot of the problem is Trump. I think he's very confused and he's not sure who some of these people are. He makes tremendous mistakes. It looks like to me that he's getting closer to dementia than ever before. And you can imagine all the stress he's under, and it seems to show, all the court cases, he must be scared he might end up in jail. He looks like he's very flustered. So I don't at all give him a sure thing for getting the Republican nomination.
Oh, wow. But you would say he's going to win the primaries if something doesn't happen untoward, but you're saying he might not be the nominee, even with, I guess, everyone dropping out, right? They've all dropped out pretty much at this point, except for Haley.
It's a two-person race. And, I think New Hampshire is going to be important, what the results are. If Haley is very close, or even if she wins, which I wonder might be a possibility, I think that'll change everything around, and we'll really have a two-person race. And I think Trump, to me, looks like he's going down. And I think Haley's looking better and, would be the more logical pick, I think, for the Republicans.
Wow. So I was going to this whole thing, and we'll get into it a little bit. I'm not going to get rid of the topic, but but the basic assumption being it's Trump versus Haley, Trump with the lead. Is it fair to compare Nikki Haley to Hillary Clinton? But you're saying, no, Hal, that's a false narrative. Trump is not the shoo-in whatsoever. You're bucking the Republican Party establishment now. Of course, all the people dropped out are all now campaigning for Trump. That's Ramaswamy, that's Scott, and that's and I guess although he's not campaigning for Trump, that's that Governor DeSantis. They're all now in the Trump camp. And this, by the way, let me just throw this out. According to Nate Silver, the Oracle, I call him, at 538, all those endorsements are very, very strong indicators that Trump will, in fact, get the nomination. He bases that on history, that candidates who get a lot of endorsements early from power brokers in their party tend to win.
I don't buy that, Hal. I'm going to go against conventional wisdom, I think. And also, you got to consider that the election is far away. We're talking about November, and here we are only in January. So a lot of things are going to happen. I think this weekend was a pivotal one because DeSantis dropping out makes it a two-person race. And, DeSantis wasn't going anywhere. Nobody really, he never connected with people. And I think the second factor, as I mentioned a little earlier, was I think Trump is losing it. I mean, he's just making so many huge mistakes. He's seeming very confused. I think he's scared. I think he's under a lot of pressure. And, that's going to show more and more, I think.
Well, can you give us some examples? I'm not doubting you, but I'm really curious what you're thinking of, what you're relying on for your conclusion that Trump's kind of losing his mind.
Well, I got to tell you, I was watching Morning Joe this morning. I know it's not one of your favorites, but they played a whole bunch of clips showing, how confused he has been. I mean, he confuses Obama with, Biden, and he confuses, he was talking about January 6th, and he kept talking about Nikki Haley was in charge, thinking that Nikki Haley was Nancy Pelosi, and he used her name, Nikki Haley, many times, and he's just not getting it.
That's pretty bad. I mean, you said, I'm not a follower of the of any of the MSNBC programs. The only time I ever really see them is when I'm watching other YouTubers such as myself mocking, making fun of people like Joy Reid, people like Rachel Maddow, Morning Joe, and the like. So my basic reliance on MSNBC is kind of to laugh at. And it's because it's so overtly biased, right? I mean, it's so clearly in the tank for the corporate Democratic elites. But That said, if Trump's confused like that, the thing is, I don't see how he loses the primaries. Maybe, just maybe. By the way, most observers now, I think, have concluded he will very, very likely win New Hampshire, which is tomorrow. Is that right?
Yes.
So, and even if he loses New Hampshire, he's clearly going to win. I don't see how he doesn't win the primaries. But you're saying maybe some kind of legal problems could crop up and keep him from winning this thing?
I'm just saying there's a lot of time left. Things are going to change. People will look at him differently when they see, he's been saying so many dictatorial things about how he's going to, take over the country and get rid of news outlets that don't agree with him. And, all the things that make him sound like an authoritarian. And I think people might be should be scared of that because, our democracy could actually be at risk. And I'm hoping that the Republicans can see that. And they now have an alternative in somebody like Nikki Haley, who I don't like her that much, but she's reasonable. She's accomplished a lot. She's pretty good verbally. I think she could be a strong candidate against Biden. And by the way,
I didn't know you were going to come out as kind of a Nikki Haley apologist, Arlen, but there was an article in the New York Times that said she could be even more dangerous to Trump. Her full-throated support for Israel. I mean, she said Israel needs to completely eliminate Hamas. It doesn't matter how many Palestinians are killed, which is kind of like Trump's position, but she's also fully in support of the Ukraine war. She doesn't even seem to have any of Trump's economic populism, which is a seeming concern for the working class. She's corrupt. I don't know. I mean, to say she's a good option, I'm a little bit flabbergasted by that. You're the first person I've heard say that, actually, Arlen.
It's just a feeling that I have. And, I could be wrong, but I feel pretty confident in saying it. And she's, she often changes her mind and is not sure just where she should be on certain issues like abortion. She goes back and forth. She of course, the thing about what caused the Civil War. She mentioned all kinds of things.
Forgot about that.
Left out slavery, which is pretty telling. I think she's trying to make the base feel better, but it looks bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to see her as a good or even acceptable alternative to Trump. I mean, they're both pretty awful, Arlen. I'd have to argue, right? So, I mean, we can disagree, but that's where I'm going
not voting
with that.
for it. Don't.
Oh, no, I'm not saying you are. I'm just, I don't really view. They're both. Yeah, they're not people we want, in my opinion. Oh, you just sort of flipped around. I just kind of hit a little button there, and I didn't think it was going to cause you to flip, but it did. Pretty cool. You're watching Halitics. Don't forget subscribe. I've got my little subscribe button. Let me see if I don't know if I have it in this particular scene. I have all these different scenes and sources. I just saw you flip around, or I'm kind of cool.
Well, that's because I'm doing my morning exercises, Hal, and that happens. I'm doing some yoga, and
yeah, you kind of rotated, on the Earth, I guess something like that. There was an article, the New York Times, again, let's get to that, because their story, and this is why I kind of thought, this is where I took the position that Haley is she the new Hillary? That was my question. It sounds like from what you've said, though, you kind of like Haley, so you wouldn't really have a problem calling her, or at least you don't dislike her. So you don't really have a problem calling her the new Hillary because you think she's okay, kind of like you think Hillary was okay. Is that fair to say, Arlen?
Well, she's basically middle of the road, rather conventional. She could move around her positions a little bit, but, she's looking at the polls and she's trying to say the right things. And she sounds, very articulate. She's had some important positions, like at the UN and as governor of North Carolina. So she, she's got a lot to
I hate to correct you, Arlen, but South Carolina. She's actually from the cradle of the Confederacy, and that may be why she didn't want to throw slavery out there as the main cause, even though pretty much everyone agrees, I think with no real exceptions, that it was. This is where I call her the new Hillary, and by the way, that is what Trump. Said, what was it, Hillary. In recent years, Haley has made millions from consulting fees, paid speeches, stock, and seats on corporate boards. And the year leading up to her bid, that being, I guess, last time, did she run in 2020? She made around $2.5 million in income on speaking engagements alone, according to her financial disclosure. So doesn't that trouble you? The reason it troubles me is because the banks, the corporations that throw this money around obviously are expecting a return on that investment.
Well, think about it, Hal. She sounds like a pretty much conventional Republican. That's what Republicans do. They're pro big business. They cozy up to the corporations, and she's more like a normal Republican. Well, Trump is not, and it may be. Let's face it, the Republican Party has pretty much disappeared in a way, and it's right now it's a mostly Trump party. It's a cult, and if she could get maybe the Republicans back to where they used to be, the same kind of party that they had been with, lower taxes, lower spending, and all this kind of stuff, she may make Republican voters feel more comfortable.
So you want the Republican Party to look just like the Democratic Party?
Well, I just don't want Donald Trump in there because I think it would be disastrous for this country.
As you can, I don't know if you can see the slide I just showed there, but in 2016, CNN reported that the Clintons, I mean, they make Haley look like a piker. The Clintons combined after leaving office for $153 million in paid speeches and garnered $7.7 million from big banks, with Hillary alone collecting $1.8 million for 8 speeches to big banks. To me, this is the essence of anti-democracy. So I know you talk about how we have to stop Trump because if we don't, we lose our democracy. But if our leaders in both parties are bought and paid for by, enormous financial behemoths, doesn't that mean we don't have a democracy already?
Well, in a way, you're right, and it does disturb me quite a bit. I think we're far away from the democracy we should be, and both parties, all the politicians, they all make speeches, make a lot of money, do all the things that they've been doing for a long time, and basically pay off their donors. Whoever gives them the most money, they help them out, and that's not a way to run a democracy, really. So, but a lot of it too is I've always said is our political system. It's not just candidates, but our election system, our political system, the Constitution is kind of it's old and needs revising, and we don't give the candidate who has the most votes the presidency. We leave that to electoral college, which helps the small states, and then we have the thing where the Supreme Court has decided that money is speech. So all the rich corporations, all the billionaires can give as much money as they want to, it seems, and they get what they pay for.
Well, that's a very fair point. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think part of the reason we've seen both parties, but particularly the Democratic Party, get a lot worse. The Democratic Party really was, to a significant degree, the party of the working class up until probably the late 70s or even into the 80s. Kind of lost that with Bill Clinton, with the Clinton presidency, and never looked back. But it's going to become a lot harder for them to go back to the working class when the working class has so little money, such few resources, especially because of policies that both parties have pursued, and with money being even more important now. It is a conundrum. I mean, I get that. I don't want to be just simply say, well, the Democratic Party is completely soulless. I mean, they are faced with a difficult needle to thread. How do we support working class priorities and still raise money?
Yes,
but that's what they need to do. Whether, I don't care how hard it is, do it. And they simply don't, in my opinion.
No, they don't. They're stuck with that, rule that, money is just something that, big people with a lot of money can donate it. And that's what makes a difference in politics and in elections. And so they maybe feel they have no choice, but then again, people like Bernie Sanders was able to overcome that somewhat. And I just like you, I'd like to see the Democrats do a little more for the working class, a lot more actually, and not rely so much on big money.
Well, Trump obviously sees it kind of the same way I do. There's his Instagram from January 17 last week. He mishmashed Hillary and Nikki Haley, and he's even using that turn right H there. If you can see the arrow, Arlen, you cannot see if you look, you should be able to see coming back at you the H, the Hillary H. Remember, Hillary had that turn right arrow when she ran, and so he adopted it, obviously hoping lightning will strike twice. And it doesn't look like he's going to have any trouble dispatching Ms. Haley, if not in New Hampshire soon thereafter, albeit with the understanding that with the legal troubles he's facing, you never know in politics. Arlen, let's get to any further words. So you were kind of you're kind of a supporter, a little bit of Haley. You agree with Jamie Dimon, the billionaire fraudster from J.P. Morgan, who has called on Democrats and independents in New Hampshire to support Haley in the primary tomorrow.
I'm certainly not a Haley fan. I don't want anybody to think that. I don't like her. I don't like any Republicans. But if I had to choose a Republican who could be president, it would be Haley over Trump any day.
All right. There it is from Arlen Grossman.
Time will tell.
We will indeed. It's a very close race between Trump and Biden, pursuant to all the polls. If Trump is having those kind of moments, it sure sounds like dementia to me. If he's saying that Haley was the speaker, if he's confusing her with Pelosi, that's pretty serious dementia, perhaps on a par with or even worse than Joe Biden's. So we are really faced with with quite a choice, and that's, again, Arlen, think outside the box. Let's vote green. Together, we can make things better. We can support someone who really, hopefully, will take on the establishment. Look, I've gotten a lot wrong. I thought AOC would be a difference maker. She hasn't been. I thought maybe Ilhan Omar would be a difference maker. She hasn't been. So the squad hasn't done squat. Hey, I even liked Jamie Raskin when he first ran for Congress, and he's one of the people I find most loathsome and most problematic in all Congress. So I get a lot wrong, no question about it. Right now, I cannot see supporting a Democrat for president.
Yeah, and the last thing most people want to see is another remake of the 2020 election with Biden against Trump. Two old people against each other like that. And I'm not happy that Biden is running. I'd rather have somebody a little bit more charismatic, stronger, younger, but he apparently is not going to step down. So, we're going to be stuck with Biden. But I don't see him having the same kind of, lapses that Trump has, not nearly. So
no, I would agree with that, Arlen. I don't think he's been as messed up as Trump. What's interesting, Arlen, is that Biden says the reason he's running, he's been real clear that if Trump weren't likely the opponent, he wouldn't even run, which I find very strange because, you've made the point you don't think Biden's the strongest person to take on Trump. I'm not sure you're right. Biden has, for whatever reason, some appeal to working class voters. I don't know who else in the Democratic Party does at this point against a Donald Trump.
Well, you put somebody like Biden against somebody like Trump, and what Biden does is carefully make legislation that improves the economy, and he does what he's supposed to do, what most presidents are supposed to do, and people can be comfortable with him, but I think they might be afraid of somebody like Trump or somebody of Trump's ilk. So I think, Biden's got that advantage. He does do some good things. He does, the economy seems to be improving. I think people are starting to recognize that, and I think that'll help a lot.
Well, it's, look, I think people's expectations have been so tamped down by 40 years of neoliberalism. I think, people just think, hey, if I can pay the rent, I'm ahead of the game. So many Americans look at the world right now. So if that's what you aspire to, then I guess Biden's no worse than anybody else. The problem is we don't have a system now where working class people can legitimately feel, if I vote for this person, they're going to fight for me. They're going to stand up for me against the corporate multinationals and the billionaire class. The only person people could have reasonably thought that about was Bernie. And of course, he was taken down by the Democratic elites. So, it's a good reason to be hopeless, if you ask me, Arlen. We even agree we don't have a democracy right now with the Democrats in charge.
Yeah, it's a two-person race for president. It always has been, and it probably always will be, because the parties are so strong. They don't want to allow anybody else in. So it's really hard for a third-party candidate to get anywhere close to have a really progressive person running. So, we're our hands are tied in a lot of ways. The Democrats' hands are tied, progressive hands are tied because of, again, the system. Our system is so outdated and wrong and unfair, and it should be changed, but getting it changed would be changing the Constitution, and that's really hard to do.
Well, let's get into why Trump is popular, because you, I think, believe, and I base this only on what you've said, that the Democrats don't message well. The Democrats haven't been able to explain why their policies are good for people. And a lot of people are bigots and racists and deplorable. Is that basically correct?
And I think another important thing is that Trump is very strong, very charismatic, very energetic. And that's the opposite of somebody like Biden. I think, Biden lacks that, the charisma, the sex appeal, whatever. He just doesn't come across in the same way that somebody like Trump does. So that'll hurt him.
Well, certainly Hillary also was a very poor candidate from charisma standpoint. If you look at the two successful Democratic presidents before Biden, no question, are both very charismatic. And some of this may also be gender. I do think, when people claim that Hillary was the victim of sexism, it was so often an excuse. It was a way to change the subject, to distract us from all the really bad things she'd done, all the harm she'd caused. That said, lots of people run for office who are bad people, who are, do terrible things. And a lot of times they don't get criticized the way Hillary did. So part of that may well have been sexism. I don't offer that as an excuse for her, but I'm just saying that may be part of the reason she lost. But I think it's really, really, really important that we stay focused on the way life has gotten worse for so many Americans. And I think that is why a populist like Trump has so much appeal. Even if he's a faux populist, even if he's part of the billionaire class, all of that, he does use language that we really haven't seen from either political party, and we certainly don't see from a Nikki Haley. This is from 2018, so the demographics, from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Arlen, I put this together, by the way, in response to this article you shared with me from David French, which we may get into. That's with regard to DEI, because he made a comment in there that I just thought was absurd, and I wanted to prove why I thought it was, prove the basis for my belief it's absurd. But this, I think, and this is 2018, but Trump had just been elected president, I think, when this came out, or it's based on data through 2017, so just when Trump had taken office. Let's just go through a few of these little the nuggets here, if we can, Arlen, and I think maybe this will shed some enlightenment, at least from my perspective. So one of the issues we've seen lately is that Latino voters, Hispanic voters, have definitely moved towards the Republican Party. Now, I'm not saying that they're a majority of Hispanics at this point, but at least one poll says that Trump has the support of more than half the Latinos. We've also certainly seen African-American men are moving towards the Republican Party. This, from the Federal Reserve of St. Louis, I think explains that. Over time, non-white, we're talking about Latinos, African-Americans, Asians who are working class, those without a four-year degree have become more similar to working class whites in terms of family income and wealth. So what you're seeing is a very large group, many millions, over 100 million Americans who are in the same basic place economically.
Yeah.
And it's unsurprising that they would see their interests, at least their economic interests, relatively similarly.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, people are hurting, and they really can tell that the Democratic and Republican parties aren't helping them that much. And so, they're looking for an answer. Trump, came up with, he's the anti-establishment person, and he's going to make a big change and all that. And that appealed to a lot of people, understandably. Drain the swamp and all that, even though he made the swamp worse. But but I think right now Trump is not even talking in those terms right now. Right now he's all about anger and hate and dividing people. Criticizing judges and prosecutors, and just being just look at his face, how angry it looks, and that's the person he's become, and I think that's going to hurt him.
But don't you think that anger is exactly what so many Americans feel right now, and understandably so? Again, from the Federal Reserve of St. Louis, this is in 2016, after 8 years of Obama as president. And I'm not saying it's all Obama's fault. I'm not saying all the policies were because of him, but people do tend to attribute their current circumstances to the president, from whichever party. The white working class declined both in size and relative well-being. Uniquely among groups, the white working class decreased in both numbers, and also, most importantly, all 5 measures of well-being tracked. So that includes health and other mental health, physical health, but they all deteriorated, and specifically the shares of all income earned and the wealth owned by the white working class fell faster than their population share. In other words, they grew poorer relative to everyone else. And we've already seen that non-college educated Latinos and African Americans are similarly situated to these white voters, although their situation has improved relatively, but they're still probably slightly worse off than the white working class. So this entire group of 100 plus million people have been betrayed, forsaken by both political parties. Can you not understand why they would be extremely angry and might react positively to someone like a Trump who does express anger, albeit in my view, sometimes against the wrong target?
No, I'm with you, Hal. I think the situation in this country is awful in the sense that the average working person is not moving up as he should be, and most of the money is going to wealthy people, and so I'm equally distressed by that, and I wish it was different, but that I think Biden's got to deal with that, and so I hope he with his messaging, if he could make some big moves that might help working class people, that can be a big difference. But yeah, it's our system is pretty messed up right now.
Well, I also thought this was very interesting. And this is, again, part of the reason why, in my view, people of color are moving towards Trump, if not towards the Republican Party. When you get out of the working class realm, or at least people who don't have a college degree, when you get to people with college degrees like you and me, for example, white college degree holders and their families have done better, right? We've seen the white working class falling relative to everybody else, but the white college educated group has done better than everybody else, or except maybe than Asians. Asians aren't included here. So if you're an African-American or a Latino, Hispanic with a college degree, you're not seeing your situation get much better. You didn't see it get better under Obama. Well, so there's going to be, again, resentment, anger. Hey, wait a second. I went to college, and yet I'm not really doing any better. And I've got an enormous debt I've got to pay off. A huge college debt, which I read some article. I'm just putting myself in their place. I know I read the article. I know who wrote the article. But you're saying to yourself, I went to college. I worked really hard. I got good grades. And I'm struggling, and I owe several $100,000 in college loans. And I read some article that says that's Joe Biden's fault because he championed for-profit student loan Shylocks back in the 1980s. So why would I ever support a Democrat under those circumstances?
You've mentioned Hispanics, you mentioned Black people, but I think there's one group of people who, and it really worries me a lot, is young people. Young people are even moving toward Republicans more than they were before. And if that happens, the Democrats are really in big trouble because they will need young people for sure.
So I think these are all the reasons. I don't think it's that people are either better or worse. Look, we all are tribal. We all can be appealed to through our reptilian fear of the other. That puts Democrats in a tough spot. They have to appeal to people based on self-interest, not on anger, not on resentment, not on racial resentment. I would say, yes, focus on anger, focus on emotional resentment, but then come up with your targets. And I would say those targets should be Wall Street. Those should be the people who send jobs overseas, the offshorers. Those should be the corporations that are constantly cutting back pay or keeping pay stable and raising work requirements. That's what Democrats should do. I read an article this time, I did read, where apparently, it wasn't even articles, by a friend of the show, Bill Neal, who's been on this program before. He pointed out that back in the 90s, when Robert Reich, who I think is one of your people you like, Arlen, would go try to appeal to working class voters and talk about corporate welfare, Robert Rubin, former president, CEO of Goldman Sachs, also a Clinton advisor, told Rahm Emanuel, or whoever was I think it was Rahm Emanuel. He told Rahm Emanuel, tell Reich if he keeps saying corporate welfare, I'm quitting. If you try to pit working class people, if you try to make this a class issue, I'm out of here. This is the billionaire Robert Rubin. And of course, Rahm Emanuel happily told Robert Reich, cut out with the corporate welfare talk.
I had high hopes for Obama. He sounded like he could really make a difference. But the first week or so, when he started to put all those Wall Street people like, Rubin into positions.
Well, this was Clinton. Let me just correct. That was under the Clinton administration. And I was wrong. It was not Emanuel. It was Leon Panetta of the Central Coast. So that was not Ari. It was not Emanuel. Ari Emanuel is Rahm Emanuel's brother. He's a Hollywood agent. It was not Rahm Emanuel who did work for Obama. It was, in fact, an equally sleazy guy. A guy I really dislike, Leon Panetta. I don't want to say equally sleazy, but a really bad guy. Pretty hard to be sleazier than Rahm.
He's going to be elected to the California Hall of Fame shortly. I don't know if you're going.
Very exciting. Not warmonger Leon Panetta. Again, not one of my favorites. Not one of my favorites. So the point, but you're right about Obama too. He put Tim Geithner in charge, and he makes millions from speeches to big banks too. He did a lot of favors for them, and now he's cashing in.
Yeah, Obama decided that he would go with Wall Street. He figured, well, I better have those big guys behind me. And unfortunately, it's not good for working people, and it doesn't look good. And, I think working people paid the price throughout the Obama administration. He did some good things, but he didn't do enough. And, and I'd like to see Joe Biden sound more like you, Hal, if I can say that, is because, he's got to, talk about some strong issues and, make some real big changes, not be so, pro Wall Street, find ways to make working people, look better and achieve more. But he, he's not doing it yet, and I hope he will.
Yeah, by the way, sorry for that giant subscribe now. I'm still struggling a little bit, folks, here with trying to get all the tech correct. We got a few little issues here to iron out. As Arlen says, it wouldn't be Halitics without tech problems. Arlen, you can always say, let me just respond, you can always say that Joe Biden should be more like me. That is something you never have to worry about saying on this program. I will always welcome such perfectly reasonable and appropriate talk.
On certain issues, certainly not, you shouldn't take your whole, all of your views, but on certain issues.
I think he should. I'm going to argue there. I think he should take all of my views and embrace
I'm sure
every
you
last
do.
one.
I think he should take my views, but I don't think he will. He doesn't listen to us. He's got other people advising him.
I am sure you think he should take your views. And that is, I guess, where we are as people. We always think people should. We're always happy with our, people argue with me and they say, Hal, I want your take on this, by the way, Arlen. they always say, well, Hal, you always think you're right. And my response is, of course I think I'm right. If I thought I was wrong, I change my opinion.
Sure.
It's not that I always think I have been right. I know I've gotten lots of things wrong. And then when I'm wrong, I change my opinion. So I thought Barack Obama was going to be a great president. For a while, I thought he was a really good president. Now I've changed my mind. I don't think that anymore. I was wrong then, but I don't think I'm wrong now. If I thought I was wrong now, I changed my opinion now to go back to what it used to be if I thought I was right then and not now. That makes sense.
Every time the phone rings here, I'm hoping it's the White House saying, we want Arlen to help advise us. But, he hasn't called yet, so there's not much I could do about that. But I think he'd be better off if he followed my plans more, and even some of yours.
Is he? Well, I know that you were consulted when California was what was it that you did? And I really liked what your advice was. What was it? The issues that are most important to California and something like that?
Yeah, it was a few years ago. I'm not sure exactly why I was picked, but they try to get people together and figure out a way, people of different persuasions, and figure a way to get together and, make decisions that'll help. But frankly, I don't think it worked. People seem to always go toward their own self-interests, and that's just the kind of society we live in.
Yeah, well, people are always going to do that. By the way, I did catch that too big subscribe now and got it smaller, but it blew it again.
Well,
this is true. We always will vote our self-interest, but I think Democrats have failed signally to persuade many, many voters that it's in their interest to vote Democratic. I think that's part of the problem. And I think this focus, and maybe we'll get to this now as we wind down. By the way, it is Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. Arlen with me. Please do click like, click subscribe. Arlen was very pleased. Lots of response to my latest program, but this one from Friday it must have hit some algorithm in YouTube because it got widespread distribution and a lot more clicks. I'm very pleased about that. I'll talk a little more tomorrow. I don't want to waste Arlen's time with that, but it was nice to see. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, even the New York Times critical of it, the idea that colleges, universities, employers need to make a very aggressive effort to have very diverse workplaces, to hire people at the same rate. This includes schools as well. In other words, you have the same number of people of color who are promoted and salaries are commensurate. With gender, there's no differences in gender, et cetera. Where do you stand on that? Not on the goal, the ideal, but on this kind of requirement that people have to commit to supporting DEI, and also, I think, to saying, and I'm going to show this up, Arlen, but I'll show the quote from the New York Times, which I frankly didn't even understand, but to also attribute differences in outcome to biases, to structural racism, to sexism, and the like, to homophobia. Do you think this is something that employers and universities should require of those who matriculate or work at their institutions?
Well, it's very tricky. I think, all of us liberals, progressives, Democrats, whatever, would want to see everybody included in, what we, in our economy. And that makes a lot of sense. So they're Black, Hispanic, whatever. But the way we're going about doing it apparently is not, we're just not doing very well. So let's see. And part of the reason is because millions of white Americans are content with their vastly disproportionate share of national wealth and power. So yeah, a lot of white people don't want to give up, their advantages, I guess, and they feel they are. So you end up with a lot of problems of how it's done, and we have to be very careful about it. Let's see, what does it say here?
So Arlen, I just want to say that was the quote by French that I thought was so ridiculous and wrong-headed and misguided, the one that you just cited with approval. That's why I went through that whole exercise of pointing out that the white working class has relatively suffered, has seen its share of national income and wealth decline.
Yeah.
So it's hardly true that there's this disproportion. Yes, it's true, I guess, that whites as a whole have a vastly disproportionate share of the national income, but that's because most billionaires are white. That's because Bezos is white, and Robert Rubin, the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, is white, and Zuckerberg, and all of them are white. The people who live in Youngstown, Ohio, many of whom are white, aren't doing well at all. And so for French to accuse those folks of somehow being, I guess, selfishly hoarding their unfair advantages seems so tone deaf and so, frankly, ignorant of what most Americans are going through.
Well, I think those are the kind of people that Trump affiliates with, or like Trump. I think that they just want theirs and they don't care about anybody else. But you have to.
Well, I think they do want theirs, but I mean, who doesn't? I mean, if your family can't afford health care, or is looking at being evicted next week, of course they're going to be first and foremost thinking of themselves.
Yeah, well, it's not going to change overnight. I think gradually we have to include everybody into our, economy, into our life, and there has been progress in a lot of areas. But like you say, there's certain places like corporate boards and all that. It's all white. It's all powerful white men.
It's all white. It's not necessarily powerful white men. I know women who've been on corporate boards. In fact, they were targeted to be put on boards. There are African Americans who are on corporate boards because they want African Americans. They want the corporate boards to be diverse. For David French to say, "Oh, it's because they're happy with their disproportionate amount of wealth," I just can't see how that wouldn't be incredibly offensive to the tens of millions of working class white people whose quality of life, whose standard of living has been steadily declining for 50 years.
Yeah, but you have to make some kind of effort to include everybody, people who've been disadvantaged and include them more into the economy. The question is, how do you do it? How do you do it fairly? Not too quickly.
But the white people are also, many of them have also been disadvantaged. It's not just people of color who have been systematically disadvantaged over the past 50 years. It's working class whites as well. And there's zero recognition of that by David French. In fact, he goes in the opposite direction. But those folks are understandably angry about DEI because they're saying we're already losing share. We're already losing our place in society. It's already ever more precarious. And now you're saying we have to make way for other people and that we're somehow privileged and we have some incredibly unfair, disproportionate advantage. That's what French is saying, is it not? Am I missing something?
Well, I think it's kind of two different subjects here. We were talking before about how working class people are at a disadvantage. They're not doing as well as they should be doing. They're not giving the advantages they should be getting. But French is talking more specifically about DEI and about what we're doing to include everybody in our big inclusive economy. So it's a little bit different in that way.
No, it's not different. He says millions of white Americans are content with their vastly disproportionate share of national wealth and power. But we just saw that tens of millions, maybe 100 million white Americans are losing their share of national wealth and power. It's not that they're vastly disproportionate. Yes, some whites, a few whites, have far more than everybody else, but the majority don't.
Yeah, there's no question that, the white males have been the ones that are most in control in this country. And the question is, how do you get, people of color to get a little bit more into that?
Arlen, I know I'm cutting you off here, but you're lumping all white males together. It's not fair. That's not right. It's not true. So many white males are not doing well, are not getting disproportionate share of the wealth. Many of them are homeless. People who served our country in war are homeless.
Yeah, and they are at a disadvantage, but they don't. A lot of them don't want people of minorities to get any more power. They want to.
So what? So what if they don't want it? Is that relevant? Isn't what's relevant that everyone have enough and no one have too much? If someone is poor, they're poor. They should have health care. They should have a home. They should, if their kids do well in school, they should be able to go to college and get a good education and be admitted based on their qualifications.
Yeah, we agree on that, Hal. And that's what we talked about before, that everybody needs to be included, especially working people who have been underserved. And so we're in agreement on that. It's just these are just technical things about how do you solve the problem of getting more minorities involved in our economy. But
shouldn't that? But isn't that even a framing that's a little bit problematic when you say more minorities? Isn't a better way to frame? Because I think when you say it that way, you're saying to white working class voters, if you want them to vote for you, you better figure out a way to appeal to them. You're saying to this group that's lost share, you're not our concern. Our concern are the people of color, not you. You're going to have to give up what little you have. Rather than the actual framing should be white working class Americans, poor Americans, struggling Americans all deserve a better deal. And this is what we're going to do. You all get health care, period. That's end of story. Everyone gets a secure retirement, period. End of story. We're bringing good jobs back to this country, period. End of story. And on and on and on, rather than this kind of let's pit two groups against one group against another, all of whom aren't doing very well. And we've seen that isn't even working because look, Trump's doing better with Black and Latino voters despite this kind of virtue signaling by some people in the Democratic Party.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, Hal, and I'm on your side. I think the problem with the DEI is it has problems and it hasn't been done well, so it needs to be changed. But you're right. Overall, we should have an economy that benefits everyone, especially working people who have been underserved for a long time, and that's up to somebody like Joe Biden to make that effort, and I hope he does.
All right, you're watching Halitics. We've got Arlen with us, and I'm, as is often my wont, talking over him, interrupting him, and I'm really sorry. I am going to give Arlen a little more time at the end. We're going over, as I mentioned, we started late today, actually started, and then I had to restart because a little bit of glitches, a few technical problems, which I'm still not clear about. I think there's a bit of a delay still. I'm looking at my lips, but I'm not hearing myself or something like that. I wanted to get to something else French said that really I was scratching my head. But then, Arlen, I want you to talk about the right to vote because that was a topic you want to bring up. And I really, because I so appreciate you, even when it's my show, it's Halitics, so I get to say what I want. But I want to also placate you, keep you happy, butter you up as best I can. So here's what French writes towards the end. There's a better way to achieve greater diversity. He doesn't tell us what that way is. I really want to know what his better way was. At least I didn't read it. Maybe I missed it, Arlen. You maybe you saw it. He says there's a better way. And then he says, kind of explain that better way. They can diversify the student body without discriminating on the basis of race. Now, I was like, how do you do that? Could explain that. Did you understand that? Because I don't know how I don't know how you do that without actively, consciously taking race into account and providing, if you want to call it whatever you want, maybe discrimination is a bad word, but holding certain groups of people to a higher standard, at least a higher academic standard, I would call that discriminating against them. I'll go through the numbers in a minute, but can you explain maybe, or does French explain what that means?
I don't know if he has any good solution for, what we're talking about here. He's just saying there's better ways to do it. We're doing it poorly and it's not working. And, so we have to do something differently. I'm not sure if he, specifically says what we should be doing, but he's saying the way we're doing it is just not working. And
well, how do you, and I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm just going to say, I like your response to this. I'm not going to ask you the question, but I'm going to say, I don't understand how you can diversify a student body without taking, let's put it this way, taking race into account and holding some members, some individuals from some groups of applicants to a much higher standard than others.
That's the bad part. That's the part that nobody's really figured out.
But French says you can do it, right? He says you can do it. Does he not? I mean, or am I misreading him?
Well, I don't know.
Look at the screen. Look at your screen. You should see it,
yeah.
Arlen. You should see this on your screen. If you look at what I'm sending you.
Yeah, but he doesn't give a solution, really. He just says they can diversify the student body without discriminating. But, how exactly you do that, I don't know. But, the way we're doing it now isn't working. And people have to, figure out a way that is fair to the most people. And it's not easy, obviously.
So I want to show this. And to me, this is this. And let me say, I don't think there is a way. You can't do it. As long as different groups of applicants, identifiable by race, identifiable by skin color, identifiable by nation of origin, whatever, as long as those groups don't perform very, very, very similarly, you have to discriminate if you're going to create a student body that is roughly proportional to that of the general population, if that's your goal. That would be diversity. My response is, that shouldn't be your goal. It should be a factor. It should be something you should consider. But I don't believe it should be up to academic institutions or even employers to remedy past discrimination, to remedy injustice in outcome. That's government's job. That's the job of tax policy. That's the job of healthcare systems that are run by, operated by the government. That's the duty of job creation programs that include good government jobs that make sure that people who aren't otherwise employed have an option. To me, it shouldn't be up to institutions like Harvard or even the University of California to remedy a problem, which is that people from different racial groups come to the table with different sets of skills. And if you look at this is from Harvard, over this period from 2000 to 2017, Asian Americans did better by a very significant margin than any other group on their SATs. They were average of almost 770. 800 is perfect on one test. So they were almost, this is all the applicants, all the applicants are 726. You had to be close to perfect as if you were an Asian American even to get into Harvard. You had to be close to perfect. African Americans applicants had much lower scores, and their successful applicants had lower scores, although the difference wasn't as great. And then you look at other groups, and whites second to Asian Americans. But if you look at that, you'd say, well, then probably Asian Americans should be the ones who get in at the highest rate because they have the best scores. And also, it's not just they have the best scores, but also what we've seen, from the Tiger Mom and all that is their instruments, right? They're learning, they play various instruments. They do all sorts of extracurriculars to maximize their chances to get into these schools. That's very, very important in some subsets of Asian culture. I don't want to stereotype too much, but the point is that if you look at the one marker that is identical for every group, Asian Americans do the best. And yet they are accepted at the lowest rate. It's the hardest people to get in. They have the lowest acceptance rate of any group, of any racial group. That's clearly, how could we not see that as clear discrimination, Arlen? It is. And there's no way you're going to get a diverse student body if you don't discriminate the way Harvard did. And I think we agree, diversity is a nice goal, but discrimination is a really bad way to get there. And since we can't get to diversity without discriminating, maybe we should reconsider our goals.
Yeah, I mean, it pains me to say it, but I kind of agree with you. I don't think, we should, affirmative action is not a great solution because it does not, make an objective, result. It just, you can't really discriminate against Asian Americans by admitting less of them. That's not really fair to them. So, ultimately, like you say, it's up to the government to get people up higher, work on education and work on all the things necessary to get those who are, whose results haven't been good to get better and have a better chance.
I heard one African American, I can't remember where I saw this. I was really taken by the statement, which was, hey, I attended a historically black college and it was really good for me, and I can't remember who it was, but he said, I really wasn't prepared to go to an Ivy League school with these kids who had gone to, either top public high schools or prep schools. But I got to where I needed to go by going to an HBC or an HBU. And then I was able to leverage that into a top graduate school. So there are alternatives beyond, the flagship universities and colleges for kids who may or may not be in a position, may not have done as well on these kind of objective markers. And I understand, these kids get to, their parents pay for them to get tutored and all that. But you know what? The SATs are much harder to tutor for than schools. And GPAs have been shown to be pretty much worthless now because there's so much grade inflation that everyone's basically getting an A anyway. So it's kind of meaningless. Arlen, before we go, I promised you, and I know we're going a little overtime. I really don't care. I want you, if listeners don't like it, I guess you can turn it. Don't just keep listening. Just keep watching.
Yes.
Arlen, let's get to this. You think we need another right? You think we need what I think a lot of us think we have, the right to vote, but you're saying, and you're not the only one saying this, apparently some guest writer at the New York Times is also saying this, we need the right to vote. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the problem is the Supreme Court is going to the states and saying, oh, it's okay if you want to, make some laws that are really unfair to minorities or, whatever. And that's, that shouldn't be the way it is. Most countries have a constitutional right to vote. You should be able to vote. And the Supreme Court is saying, the states can make up their own mind about how they want to do it. And the states, as we know, could be very discriminatory when it comes to allowing people to vote and with gerrymandering and all that. There should be more of a kind of like a federal system that gives everybody the right to vote and not be discriminated against within certain states.
Why, Arlen, don't we? It's interesting because this seems to me, the Supreme Court found, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I want to try to gather my thoughts and be as coherent as I can be. The Supreme Court has found certain rights that within the penumbras and emanations of the Constitution, and auras, like reproductive rights, for example, which I think they were right to find that right. They were correct to find that right. And now they've pulled back at least the right to choose. Why isn't the right to vote? It would seem to me that's a even more right to reproduce or not seems pretty fundamental. I would say the right to marry is pretty fundamental, but I would say in a democracy, the right to vote is more fundamental.
Well, yeah, it really is. But unfortunately, we go by the Constitution. The Constitution was written, several hundred years ago when the founders really didn't believe in universal voting. They didn't allow citizens to vote for the Senate. They'd allowed only certain races to vote. there was
property owners. You had to have property,
Yes.
I believe, at least in many states.
Yeah, so you have the Constitution in your way, because the Constitution really gives states a lot of power in making decisions about voting, and that's a shame, because as we know, some states are not fair. And for a while we had a good system where certain states in the South that had a history of that kind of thing, were restricted, but now they can do whatever they want, apparently. And the Supreme Court feels that they're not discriminatory. So, it's a mess. And we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to vote. And ideally, the person with the most votes should be the president. And we don't even have that.
No, we sure don't. Now, let me ask you this, though. Because this is where I was going with that before. Why has the Supreme Court, though, not been willing to find that affirmative right to vote when it has found other rights that are not specifically enumerated within the four walls of the Constitution?
Well, we know why, because the Supreme Court is whoever certain presidents pick to be on it. And right now we have a very conservative right-wing Supreme Court by far, and Trump made a few of those picks and seemed to do it in a not a very legal way, but, he was able to do it. So, it depends on, whatever the Supreme Court wants it to be.
So I guess it's really unfortunate that the Brennan court, the court with, William J. Brennan, Thurgood Marshall, I guess that would have been at one point the Earl Warren court, and then moved on. It's very unfortunate that they didn't have a case where they had to rule on whether there's an affirmative right to vote, because they might well have found such a right.
And that could have been changed, just like, reproductive rights. At one time we had Roe versus Wade with a different kind of court. Now they're changing it, and they're taking that away because we have a right-wing court. So, the Supreme Court has gotten too political over the years, and we're paying a price for it.
Arlen, is there a movement? I didn't really look that closely at this article, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm looking to be educated. Is there a movement right now to have an amendment that says you have a right to vote?
I have not heard of any or seen of any. That doesn't mean there isn't, but no, I don't know of one.
Okay. Anything, I'm going to leave it there, because I don't really think I have an intelligent question to ask as a follow-up. But I ask you if you have more you want to say on this.
I'm just going to stick with what I started the program with. I think Trump is going down. I think Haley's going to be the eventual Republican nomination for president, and that'll make for an interesting race. As long as
Arlen, that's very bold. That is a very bold take, because you're really going. Do you think this could come to pass because maybe states will block Trump from the ballot? We've seen that movement.
Yeah, I wish. I don't think that's going anywhere. I mean, it should. The Constitution is pretty clear that he, was involved in an insurrection and should not be running. But, the general consensus is the people should vote on that. And I don't agree with it. I think if you're going to follow the Constitution, you follow it literally. That's what a lot of the members of this current court say,
So Arlen, you and I disagree on a lot. That's an area where I am really on the fence. I think you make a good argument. I've really thought a lot about this. I do think that the Constitution should be interpreted and enforced as written. I agree with you that insurrectionists who were in office, who violated their oath, are barred. I'm not certain Trump definitely falls within that, but he might. I don't like keeping people off the ballot, but I think you make a good argument. This is a very, very tough one for me. But you're saying, and I agree with you, that will not be the basis. If Trump is not the Republican nominee, will not be the basis for his not being the nominee.
It will not be.
Do you think the Republican, I'm sorry, I can't keep the skepticism out of my voice here. You really believe the Republican primary voters are gonna vote for Nikki Haley over Donald Trump?
If they see what I'm seeing of him going downhill mentally, getting closer to dementia, succumbing to all the pressure that he's under, courts and other things, I think when they see that and the horrible things that he says, they may come to the point where they realize, hey, maybe he's not the guy now.
So I disagree with that. I don't think that's correct. I do think, and you may agree with this, I do think that to the extent that this becomes more evident to more people, it will definitely redound to the benefit of Joe Biden, who I would say right now, if you look at the polling, is maybe slightly behind. The Electoral College probably doesn't favor him in the end, even though he did well in 2020. But, if Trump keeps saying things that are clearly just misguided, wrong-headed, that everyone can see, not like something that I consider completely absurd, like climate change is a hoax. To me, that's demented and delusional, but his base would embrace that. But to the extent he gets basic facts that there's agreement on wrong, I think that really will help Joe Biden. So that's reason for optimism.
Well, yeah, obviously there's going to be a certain number of Trump cultists that will stick with him no matter what he does. But I don't think it's enough to make a difference, in the nomination, and certainly not in the general election. So, I think Trump is going to go down. That's just my feeling right now.
All right. Well, from your lips to somebody's ears, that's Arlen Grossman. That's going to do it for today's program. Thanks, Arlen. Always great to have Arlen on. Look forward to it next week. I hope I don't drive him off. I often have that effect.
Well, I'm able to say what I want to say, Hal, so I'm happy.
Well, I give you, that's the thing, and I'm going to mute. Now he's not going to get to say anymore because I'm going to mute him right now, so you will not hear Arlen again for the rest of this program. But I do always, even when I take over programs, I always try to let people have their positions made clear. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for watching.